For joining us right now. First up for you tonight at 5:30. Residents in Middlebury are speaking out over plans for a new distribution warehouse in town.
Yeah, a public hearing has been on the issue, has been extended several times, and there is another session set for tomorrow night. Channel 3 Waterbury Bureau Chief Audrey Russo has the details on why so many people are upset.
People come here to have beautiful homes and scenery.
Jennifer Marr feels that scenery could be in jeopardy. Middlebury's Conservation Commission is considering an application to build a large-scale distribution center on Christian Road. Marr is concerned about the changes a 720,000 square foot warehouse and its trucks could bring.
We're talking about thousands of truck trips a week. On 188, which is currently a 2-lane state road, no turning lanes.
And it's not difficult to gauge how the residents of Christian Road feel about this project. The closer you get to the property, the more and more signs like this one you start to see. Another concern, the residents don't know who would be using the warehouse.
The applicant has said there is no tenant at the moment, that this is a speculation build.
We reached out to the attorney for the developer, Drubner Equities, to ask if there's a tenant in mind, but we haven't heard back. However, at the last public hearing, the attorney fought back against claims that the project would disrupt the neighborhood, saying it's in alignment with the town's zoning regulations.
The insinuation, or at least the claim, was that this should be in an industrial park, should be located there. The answer is that it is in an industrial park.
We spoke to Don Poland, the director of planning for a real estate consulting firm. He says these types of buildings have started cropping up in Connecticut more and more because of its access to Boston, New York, and other parts of the Northeast, asking a region of the country with the oldest infrastructure to handle the growth of modern e-commerce.
Most communities probably have industrial zoning. At the point in time when they created those regulations, did they conceptualize facilities in excess of 800,000 square feet? Probably not. They were probably thinking 200, 300,000.
In Middlebury, Audrey Russo, Channel 3 Eyewitness News.